Our scripture reading this morning is taken from 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning in verse 13. And we'll read through the end of the chapter. 1 Peter 2, verse 13. Submit yourselves, therefore, for the Lord's sake, to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as sent by him, for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Act as free men, and do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondslaves of God. Honor all men. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the king. Servants, be submissive to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are unreasonable. For this finds favor, if for the sake of conscience toward God a man bears up under the sorrows when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if, when you sin, you are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, and you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. For you have been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example for you to follow in his steps, he who committed no sins, nor has any deceit found in his mouth. For while being reviled, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. And he himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. For by his wounds you were healed. For you were continually straying like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your soul.
So growing up, I was a good kid. I was very well behaved. And I know this because parents told me that. But then also, my principal loved me. His name was Mr. Dowdell. And for the first couple of years of my grade school life, he would always call me the judge. Really don't know where that came from. But he would, and he was nice to me. He was nice to my brothers. Well, he retired, and we got a new principal. And she was a little different. And so she had this great idea. I guess she really didn't like the sound of children. And so for lunch, in the lunchroom, she installed a stoplight. Anybody else have a stoplight? All right. I guess it was just that timing, Matt. So, or maybe it was just us. So in the lunchroom, you had a stoplight. And if it was green, you could talk freely, do whatever you want. Yellow, you had to keep it low. And then red, nothing. Not a word. You had to eat in silence. I'm not sure if there was a bulb in the green side. I'm not sure. But Miss Rosenbaum, she would let it know. She would change it. So typically it was yellow when we came in, and as more kids got in, it'd turn red. Well, there was one time. If I did have a fault growing up, which I did, it was talking. Okay, I would talk to my friends, and so yes, one time we were sitting down and we were having lunch, and it turned red, and we continued to talk. Well, the two friends the two friends that were with me, they got sent to the principal's office, but I didn't. So now I have the moral dilemma because I know I'm guilty. So again, I'm a good kid, so I turned myself in. So I go to the principal's office and I say, Miss Rosenbaum, I was talking to, thinking of course that the goodness of me going and confessing that's going to, I won't have to suffer the same punishment. Because you know what the punishment for talking was? It was spanking. You got 3 three licks for talking. Yes, yeah. Yeah, I didn't really like Mrs. Rosenbaum. So of course, she says, all right, well, you're next. And so she lines me up, and I get a spanking for talking because the light was red. For what credit is it if, when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? That verse just, man, that was the verse for me. But authority. We have lots of authority we have authorities in our lives, right? But yet, as we read in this passage, and a little before this, Peter lets us know we're aliens. We're aliens. We are not residents of this place. We are foreigners without rights. If you're here on Sunday mornings, you've been going through the Alien series with the preaching team here. And I think they've done a really good job, and I really appreciated Bill's lesson that he did on January 23rd that covered this exact same passage. And I encourage you to listen to that lesson if you didn't hear it. But we're going to talk a lot about the same things today, but hopefully in a new way. So we are aliens, right? And we've got these authorities. If you've ever lived in another country, you understand the fact that if you are an alien, you don't have the same rights. Princeton's getting to go through the process of becoming an American citizen, and so he's doing that so he is no longer an alien. So we really do have an alien among us here. It's besides ourselves. But I really believe that when we learn to accept the authority that God has placed in our lives, that we are free to live in hope, that actually frees us up to live hopeful lives and to spread that hope. So let's look first, we're going to start in verse 13. And it just starts right off. I've been reading the New Revised Standard, and it says, accept all authority. That that hits us wrong, doesn't it? So let's look at other versions. Let's see if there's a better version. Oh, NIV, submit yourselves. ESV, be subject. Even the Message doesn't soften it. Respect the authorities. There's just no getting around it. And Paul is in complete agreement with Peter here. Romans 13 expresses really just the identical thought. We need to accept the authority. And beyond just that, the authority instituted among men, or every institution of man. So that should just be able to stand on its own, right? That should be enough. But we want to qualify that statement. It can't be that, right, God? I mean, you're God, and we always hear, well, unless the authority goes against God, right? Well, Peter's writing at a time when the authority was going against God, and so can't really go that route. So let's look at authority. What is the place of authority? I recently read a book called Influence by Robert Cialdini, and he outlines 7 principles of persuasion. And he looks at a number of things that work in our lives, and these are the things that in some ways they're blessings, because they're the things that we have in society that help us function quickly. When we see lots of people going towards one thing, we tend to gravitate towards that. And that's actually healthy in society. When you see your peers working together and see them moving one way, it helps you avoid possibly a danger somewhere else. Authority is one of those things. Authority, when it's right, people follow the lead of credible and knowledgeable experts. I mean, that's what we hope authority to be. We hope it to be someone who is credible, who inspires, who's looking out for our interests. And in that way, authority should help us live our lives in an easier way. Authority should be there so that we can go about the things we do without having to worry about all the things going on, in the legislature and in the governing and in between other countries. But when authority doesn't have that respect, it gets harder. And we think that we need to exert some voice into that authority. But God is calling us here. And I think He's calling us back to this authority so that we can live in the same way that we would have if we had a good authority. We can still live taking care of the things that God has given us. Too often I get wrapped up in the big things that I don't have control of, but I don't take advantage of the things in front of me. When I look at Jesus, Jesus, He didn't heal the leper by fixing the healthcare system. He healed the leper by touching him. He didn't worry about how things were being governed. He didn't worry about the Roman officials. He worried about the people that He could touch and that He could work with. If we would accept authority placed over us, it allows us to take care of individual needs of those who are hurting and suffering. When we believe that those above us are doing wrong, we've got to guard our hearts against rebellion. I was able to teach in Bible class on Nimrod and, who was the other guy? Nimrod and Ham, that's right. It was just on Sunday, I should remember it. But the lesson there was against rebellion. And if we look at the Garden of Eden, it was rebellion there. Whenever we begin to have this rebellious spirit, we really need to check to make sure that we are not rebelling against what God has given us, what God has put in place, and not presuming to do too much. I went to David's class the other day on the being nurtured by the Spirit. And in his class, he talked about chaos and the role that God uses chaos in our lives. And he started with looking at Job. And when God comes to Job, He talks about Leviathan. In his proof of who God is, God points out Leviathan, this monster that is untamable, that is wild, and that destroys things. But God is telling Job, not just I can defeat Leviathan, because Leviathan isn't God's enemy, but I am in control of Leviathan. God is in control of the chaos that goes on around us. Whether that be a tornado or whether that be a corrupt government, God is still in control. And as we look at this passage, another phrase that comes out to be not just that we accept authority, but that we silence the ignorant. In verse 15, he says, "For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men." Do the actions I take bring silence, or do they bring yelling? Do I get into arguments that just continually spin and have no end because one side's talking to the other? Or do I bring silence? You know, Proverbs is full of admonitions to don't argue with fools. Just let it go. If we look at Daniel, which I think is interesting because a lot of people like to look at Daniel and look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and say, see, they stood up against the unrighteous king. Well, they stood up, but they didn't stand up to the king. If you look at the passage, the king, Nebuchadnezzar, gives the decree, and they don't go and protest. They don't go up to the king and say, King, you can't do this because God is the real God. They just resist. They know the right thing to do, and they stand. And it's the astrologers who then come to the king and denounce the three men and accuse them of doing wrong, even though they're doing something good. And in the end, they definitely silenced those denouncers. They silenced the fools. If you look at Esther, if you look at other places in Daniel, they made changes to the world, but only by their submission and their continuing to do what was right. There may come a time, Bill stated this in his lesson, but there may come a time to stand. But don't miss the principle. Be subject to authority. Accept authority as long as you can. As long as it is within you to be able to subject yourself to that. Because when we do that, we are being like Christ. And that's the last part of this. As we look at why we should do this, because Jesus accepted authority. He accepted the authorities that were above him. There is this idea out there, and there's some memes that are out there that have Jesus on the cross and have someone saying, well, if he just would have obeyed the laws, then everything would have been okay. Jesus did obey the laws. Jesus wasn't crucified because he broke the law. He didn't even break the Pharisaical law. He was critical of the Pharisaical law, but he didn't break, well, okay, he broke the Pharisaical law. He didn't break the Mosaic law. He kept things and he accepted the authority. He questioned in a respectful way, but he kept those. He was crucified because they made a pretext to kill him, because he was a challenge to what their authority was by how he lived and because of the things he did, not because he broke any of their laws. Again, Bill said it best. It is better to unjustly suffer than to be unsubmissive. That's hard to take because we have this sense of justice. We have this sense of what's right. And we want to have what's right for others, but ultimately we don't like it when we are wronged. And we want to rail against that and fix that. But God is calling us to suffer. And when we do, realize that you are joining with Christ in that suffering. In the end, we will be persecuted. But wouldn't you rather it be for helping someone in need rather than standing up for your rights? Entrust yourselves to God and let God be the judge to bring about judgment. So accept the authority. Silence the ignorant by your actions and follow the example of Christ. You know, everyone wants to fix all the strife and the turmoil in our country. What if each of us stopped adding our voices to what is being said and began singing songs of hope to those who are hurting and in pain? What if we stopped complaining about how everything is wrong and expressed hope and joy to those who are suffering from the pain in their relationships? Submission is not weakness. And it doesn't allow evil to run rampant in our lives. It is rather an expression of hope in a God who will make things right and who is the true authority over our lives. I was reading last night as I was going to bed, I was reading Psalm 46. And I think this really captures this idea of trusting in God as the ultimate authority. So let me read it as I close. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though the waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at the break of day. Nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see the works of the Lord, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spears. He burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us, the God of Jacob, our fortress.